What's up again, everybody? I've got a new deck for you today. This is a classic constructed deck that I've been messing around and kicking around with for the past couple of weeks, and I think I've finally gotten to a point where I'm pretty happy with it. This is an Iyslander Stormbind classic constructed mid-range deck. Iyslander has of course been in the game already since Everfest, but only in the Blitz format, and now that she has a larger suite of cards to work with and the ability to start at 36 health and be in classic constructed, we have a lot of tools in the toolbox that could help us in this current meta. So I thought it would be fun to try and put together a mid-range list that basically has a core set of cards that can be flexible in and of themselves, but then a large sideboard that can flex in and out for specific matchups. So that's this list. I'm going to walk you through the entire list, the main board, the sideboard, how you plan to combat each specific matchup, and what cards you put into the deck for that. So feel free to watch through this entire thing, ask any questions down in the comments below. By the way, if you would like a copy of this list, a FabDB link, as well as a written guide, all of that is on my Patreon. I have that all put together for patrons to access, and there's a post that should go live when this video goes live that allows them to access that. If you'd like to support the channel, I put a lot of work into these videos and putting these decks together and getting the cards together for it, so I would thoroughly appreciate that. Alright, so first things first, understanding what Iyslander Stormbind does. She is an elemental wizard hero with 36 health and 4 intellect. She has Essence of Ice so that you can play ice cards in your deck, and if it's not your turn, you can play blue non-attack action cards from your arsenal as though they were an instant. So any blue non-attack can come on your opponent's turn from the arsenal, paying its cost, and then activating its effect. She also says that when you play an ice card during an opponent's turn, create a frostbite under their control. Frostbites are tokens that tax your opponent for 1 extra resource per frostbite. Now, what weapon are we using? Well, of course, we're using Waning Moon. This is the new weapon from the Uprising set, and it is incredibly value-driven. This can give you so much value over the course of the game. By just playing a non-attack action card, you can pitch 2 into this and threaten 3 damage. So this is a really, really powerful weapon, one that I think is really cool, and I can't wait personally to get in Cold Foil because I think this weapon's going to be played a lot. Now, she does have access to other weapons. Of course, you could do her weapon from Everfest, which is the Kraken's Aether Vein, but I am not playing Kraken's Aether Vein because I am all in on the Waning Moon. Now, talking about the equipment loadout is pretty sparse. There's basically just 1 flex spot in the equipment. Everything else is pretty much a lock. So we're always playing Coronet Peak, namely because we can use the effect to pay 3 and force a card from our opponent's hand. If we take a defensive posture, which is easy to do with Iyslander. Iyslander, by nature, can be more defensive than Kano, of course, as a wizard. But if we take a defensive posture, then we can block with our hand, keep something like 2 cards, for example. Maybe we keep 2 cards. One of them, maybe both are blue. Let's just say both are blue. And we can pitch on our turn, pitch into Coronet Peak to take a card from our opponent's hand, and after doing so, arsenal the other card. That is perhaps a blue card that we could play on their turn. If we even just keep a 1-card hand, we can choose to arsenal, or we have the option to pitch into Coronet Peak if it's a blue. So this flexibility is really good, and this effect is just really good. Plus, this is sort of like a pseudo Skullcap because it can block for 2. Now, it doesn't have the 3rd block attached to it, but sometimes you don't get that from Skullcap anyway. So this is a pretty solid little thing. Don't forget it does break when you block with it, though. We are running Fjendahl's Spring Tunic because resources are good. We can make use of our Tunic resource on our opponent's turn as well, which is fantastic. Like this resource here can pay for like I don't know, Sigil of Permafrost on our opponent's turn. It can pay for, you know, like a 1-cost blue from our arsenal on our opponent's turn. So it's really good there. It can also just help smooth out a couple of different play lines. But yeah, super solid. It's Tunic, duh. The flex spot for that, though, is Alluvian Constellus, and we can run this into any matchup that allows us to defend Arcane. Because it, first of all, allows us to defend Arcane with Arcane Barrier 1, and that completes our Arcane Barrier 3 suite. But it also allows us to put energy counters on it and then just get free uses of Waning Moon. And that is a very powerful thing. To get free uses of Waning Moon, I will take it. So we have this now. Unfortunately, it doesn't block for anything, and that's kind of a bad deal. But again, we're running this into like Rune Blades, that allow us to like ping the mirror. We can run this into the mirror because we're going to be blocking Arcane that way. We could run it into Kano if we wanted to as well. Anything that allows us to stop Arcane damage. Now, this is going to get some looks from some people, but I'm running Ironhide Gauntlet as the main arm equipment. Straight up as the main arm equipment. I am not running in this list Metacarpus node, which is funny because like Metacarpus node is just like the staple, right? But Ironhide Gauntlet just blocks. It just blocks 2, and sometimes in Iyslander, Metacarpus node doesn't actually do really that much on a specific turn or in a specific game. This is not a go wide deck. Like by nature, Iyslander can't do what Kano can do and go like super wide with multiple different spells on a turn. She can do like a couple, like 2. In that instance, Metacarpus node could be good, maybe, but really Ironhide Gauntlet always allows us to block 2, and if we're taking a defensive posture, which is probably what we're doing in more matchups than not, then this just allows us to, you know, preserve some of our life. And don't forget, we do start at 36, not at 40, so this does effectively start us at 38 to a certain degree. So we block a lot, and that helps us. And then finally, we have Storm Striders. This is Arcane Barrier 2, and this is a huge threat to our opponent's turn. At any time, we can pop this off and do like weird Iyslander things, weird wizard things, and so this is a card that we always run. If it blocked, it'd be insane, but it doesn't block, and that's okay because it does allow us to at least start some Arcane Barrier. So that's the equipment. Let's break down the main board first, because the main board is 51 cards, which means we have a 9-card flex slot that we have to add into the deck in order to get to that 60-card minimum. We're going to break down the main board, and then we'll talk through the sideboard and specific matchups. Alright, so let's talk through the main board first. Starting with these 12 cards, these are red spells, the damage-dealing spells, like the really high-powered spells of the deck. There's not many of them, because there's a lot of blues in the main board. We do include a couple of extra reds from the sideboard, more often than not, but let's talk through these first. Starting with probably my favorite, which is Aether Icebane. This card's just really good. It's on rate. It's a really well-designed card itself. It costs 3, it deals 5, and it has Ice Fusion. If you fuse this and it deals damage to a hero, then they discard a card or pay 2, which is insanely good. I mean, you see this exact same effect in Lexi with, what is it called? Chilling Icebane, I think it is. Chilling Icebane has the same sort of effect on an arrow. Aether Icebane here is a very, very good. 5 Arcane is almost impossible to stop. In most matchups, it won't get stopped, so you can always, if you fuse this, get this on-hit effect. We can consider it an on-hit effect. Super good card. So we run 3 copies of that. It's one of the best cards in the deck, and again, I wish I almost want to consider just running all, like, 9 copies. I have the blues in here as well, we'll talk about a little bit later. A little bit more powered down, but still great on-rate card is a 1-for-4 Aether Hail. This is an ice card as well. Talking about the ratios of this deck, there's a good number of fuse cards. If my numbers are correct, I'm just doing this off the top of my head, I think I have 21 fuses in the deck, like ice fuse cards that ask you to ice fuse. It's like 21 of these ice fuse cards, and then we have 30 ice cards themselves in the deck. So if you make a 60-card list, half of your deck is ice cards. So you have a great rate at fusing. Fusing is very easy. So 4 arcane damage here, and it's an ice card, and it blocks 3. All for 1 is super solid. You play this on your turn, you jam it out there, you deal some damage. Just in case you need more damage and you need it for free, In Case is there for you. This card is really good because it is a 0 for 3, which seems weird, but honestly 0 cost like damage dealing spells that have some sort of a freaky on hit are really good, which is why I do include the 0 cost ice binds, the blue ice binds in this deck, and I kind of want to include the reds as well at some point, maybe in a more aggressive version of the list that I could make later down the road. But this card's really good. It performs really well, unexpectedly well. Like in aggro matchups, they don't want to block this, but you get value because it's a 0 cost, so you don't have to pitch to it. You can keep a 2-card hand, you go In Case and then the Fuse with the second card, and you just have pure value because it freezes a hero and all equipment they control. So a really good card. And then finally we have Freezing Point, which is our in our slower control matchups, this is one of our win conditions. This is one way we can win the game, because we can establish Frost Hexes, and then we can do the combo that, maybe I'll just talk about it now. The combo involves siding in the Sigil of Permafrost that we have in the sideboard we'll talk about later, and then you basically just play Sigil of Permafrost on something they're attacking with. Maybe prior to that playing like a blue ice from Arsenal to give them a frostbite or two. If you've established these on the board, like the Frost Hexes we'll talk about later on the board, you can play Freezing Point off of your Storm Strider's trigger. So you trigger Storm Striders, play something from your hand, Freezing Point fused from your hand. At that point, you can then just push like 9 damage, create 9 frostbites off the Sigil of Permafrost, and basically just kill your opponent in one big fell swoop with a really powerful trigger off of the Sigil of Permafrost. So those are our damage dealing spells. Those are our red spells. Like I said, we have 12 of them, and they're in the main board. You play them in every single matchup. If you really wanted to, in like a slow matchup where you didn't need damage or you want to side something else in, maybe you can take out the Aether Hails, but I leave them in because they're just really good. All right, so now we're talking through the blues of the deck. This is one portion of blues. These are all damage-dealing blues that we want to play from Arsenal that cause some amount of disruption or just push a little bit of damage and make our opponent think about what they're doing. So let's look at the Ice Fuse section first. Starting with Icebind. Icebind is one of those cards that looks innocuous. Again, it only pushes 1 damage, but it's 0. It costs nothing from Arsenal, so you can easily Arsenal this. And as long as you draw into an ice card, this is free 1 point of damage, but really, it's really good at disrupting their arsenal. So if you play this at the right time and wait for your opponent to maybe pay Xaxes on resources, and play down some cards, then you can respond with this and either ask them to, pay out and stop this from hitting with, like some Arcane Barrier effects, or just it resigned to the fact that whatever's in their arsenal is not getting played on this turn. So Icebind actually pretty solid so far for me, what I've experienced. Then we have Polar Cap, and this is just one that, again, if I were playing an aggressive version of this list, which I am actually doing in Blitz, I love Polar Cap in like every color almost, but blue Polar Cap is fantastic because it pushes 2, and then if you fuse it, it just gives them a frostbite. So even though this isn't an ice card coming from Arsenal, it can threaten giving them a frostbite just like it were an ice card, and that is really nice. So you're basically asking them to pitch away resources to stop this, or they accept 2 damage plus frostbites. And then of course, playing this allows you to come in with Waning Moon. In fact, playing all of these cards we're talking about allows you to come in with Waning Moon. So keep that in mind as well. Then we have Aether Ice Vein. I talked about it with the red version. This is still super fantastic. It costs 3 and it pushes 3 damage, but you're asking a lot from an opponent on their turn when they want to do stuff to pitch away a blue card. Basically slow their turn down just to pay the cost of this. Otherwise, if it deals damage and you fuse it, they have to discard a card anyway or pay 2 resources. So their lose-lose situation is totally set up with like an Aether Ice Vein here. It does cost a lot though, so keep that in mind. But if you fuse this on your opponent's turn with an on-hit effect, it's going to ask a lot of them to really decide what their turn is going to be going forward. And that's what we want to do. We want to ask our opponent a lot of questions with our cards. On this half of the blue side, we just have blue damage dealing spells that are ice. So we have Ice Bolt that deals 3. It's super solid. It comes in for 3 and creates a frostbite, and it blocks 3 and it pitches blue, and it fuses for ice effects. So it's super solid, right? Frosting. This is fantastic for killing Aether Ashwings when they attack, because you play this out. You give a frostbite, you deal 1 damage to the Aether Ashwing, and you're really happy. It also, again, fuses, and it blocks 3, and it pitches blue. All of these are going to have all of those benefits. Aether Hail, it comes in for 2. It creates a frostbite, it's blue, it's ice, it's all that you want. So those are the damage dealing blues that we play, and I saved for last in the main board our disruption blues and our ice cards that are just really good, our gadget cards, our combo cards. Let's look at that pile now. All right, so we've talked about our red damage dealing spells, we've talked about our blue damage dealing spells. Now we have our non-attacks and instants that disrupt our opponent and allow us to do pretty cool, crazy things. So first things first, we should talk about these. Blizzard is just really good. This is the only instant we main board in the deck. technically the only instance that is in the main board. This is great because you can play it from hand. You probably never arsenal this if you don't have to, but you can play this from hand, and in doing so you're creating a Frostbite, and you're basically turning off their go again unless they pay for it. So obviously Blizzard, a fantastic main board card. We run 3 of those. We have 3 Channel Lake Frigids as well. Look, Channel Lake Frigid is probably the reason you play this deck. It's part of the reason, if not like the entire reason, because you can play Channel Lake Frigid at instant speed on your opponent's turn, not have to worry about the first flow counter. I mean, technically, when it comes to your turn, if you can pitch like an ice card and do like a Coronet Peak, or like a single like spell to get the ice into the pitch zone, then you can trigger Channel Lake Frigid. But this can stick for so many turns. Plus, it costs 2. It creates an ice if you play this from Arsenal on your opponent's turn. I mean, it creates a Frostbite, I should say. So it's super fantastic. These 2 cards are like mainstays of the deck. You could maybe argue putting like a 2 of for Blizzard instead of a 3 of, and then bringing in something like a Hypothermia. But we have Hypothermia in the sideboard, and we bring that in for specific matchups. Now onto these cards. These are other cards that just disrupt. I am running my really fun miscut Arctic Incarceration. Look how miscut that is. Arctic Incarceration is super good. You just play this from your arsenal, and you give your opponent 2 Frostbites. It costs you nothing. Turns on Waning Moon. Super, super solid little card. The Cold Snap, one of the better things you can play from Arsenal because it replaces itself. You pitch, you float 2, most likely pitching a blue. You play Cold Snap, it draws you a card. It could also maybe take a card from their hand. And if it doesn't take a card from their hand, it freezes their arsenal, which is also good disruption. But in the process of pitching a blue for this, you're floating 2, and you can Waning Moon for 3 resource, or for 3 damage, I should say, off the back of 3 resources. You're giving them a Frostbite. You're replacing this card into your hand by drawing 1, and you're also, possibly freezing out their arsenal, which is really good. Frost Hex, this is how you win the game in slower matchups, in matchups that allow you to kind of just take your time. You establish Frost Hexes, and you give Frostbites, and you can give Frostbites in a variety of ways, as you see here, playing any of these ice cards. And in doing so, you can also set up the combo, wherein you create a billion Frostbites for your opponent, and all these Frost Hexes, if you establish either 2 or 3 of these. The combo I talked about earlier with Freezing Point, where you deal upwards of 9 damage with Freezing Point, and after you've already played one of the Sigil of Permafrosts, it would create however much damage you deal in Frostbites, and then if your opponent can't pay out the number of Frostbites, then Frost Hex just blows them up. So establishing these on the board in slower matchups is paramount, and it allows you to win the game from high life totals. Like, your opponent just can't deal with it if they don't have the resources to deal with it, so it allows you to win from high life totals. Now, these last cards are sort of gadget cards, is how I'm describing them to myself. They are cards that can be good. They may flex out. I may, over time, just decide to take some of these out, but I'm starting with them in the deck. Insidious Chill has a lot of targets. We do run, like I said, about 21 Fuse cards in the main board, and so this does see you Ice Fuse. And if you play this on your opponent's turn, it costs you a lot, but it gives them a Frostbite, so you can play with a little bit of tempo in that respect. If you play it on your turn, you can establish it for future turns, and then also it just has this beautiful effect of whenever you Ice Fuse, you take one of the counters that it starts with, and they just discard or pay 2. So it's the Aether Ice Vein effect, but it's just kind of floating out there in the arena, waiting for you to Ice Fuse at any moment. So you can set this up and just rip cards from your opponent's hands in weird ways and at weird times, especially with those blue Ice Fuse cards from Arsenal. This can come out and just do some really scary stuff. Like Aether Ice Vein blue from Arsenal threatens 3 damage. With this on the board, it threatens 2 on hit effects if you can fuse it. Which is crazy, and both of them are discard a card or pay 2. So really interesting card, one that I think may just stick around in the main board. But one card I'm kind of down on right now is Ice Eternal. I do have this in the deck. I think it's one of those cards that can, if you pay into it like heavily, it can be really good. But the double X here is just kind of expensive. That being said, I am running 3 of them, and I may just through testing decide to keep them. They may just be good enough, or I may cut them over time. But it does right now starting to feel a little bit under what I expected it to be. That being said, if you fuse this, it does deal arcane damage based on the amount of Frostbites you make off of the card, so that is pretty good. Or technically, the frostbites that they have. So if you've made frostbites before, then this can really push a lot of arcane damage. Just depends on how you've made those frostbites over time. And so for me, this one is still in the deck, but I am considering maybe dropping this card in place of a couple of other things we could put in it. But that right there is the entirety of the main board. That is what we are playing into every single matchup. Now let's talk through the extensive sideboard and when we bring those cards in, because again, we're running a 51 card main board, so we need to bring in 9 cards every matchup. Alright, so here is our sideboard. It is 23 cards, and they come in little packages. I've put them together in little packages, so let's just go package by package. A couple of these, and including this one, could be considered just straight up core cards as well. So, this is the Phantasm package. It's 6 attacks, as you can see. It's 3 Erase Faces and 3 Command and Conquers. And I'm just going to say this right now. I was thinking about this, and I was looking at some other people's lists, and I was looking at some other videos, and honestly, you could probably consider these core cards and just mainboard them in almost in every matchup. Obviously, if you don't want to do that, you just bring these in for any matchup that includes Phantasm cards, so like Dromai and Prism, but you just push extra damage. And honestly, we probably use a little bit more red punch in our deck, in our main board. So bringing in like 3 Command and Conquers and 3 Erase Faces is really not that big of a deal for us to just stomach, especially because they cost 2, and we have so many blues that we can easily pay for these. And they have just relevant on-hit effects, and our opponents are most likely, you know, swapping out their equipment for Arcane Barrier equipment, so these just push a little bit more damage, a little bit more consistently than they would in normal matchups. And so bringing in 3 Erase Faces and 3 Command and Conquers into the main board is really not that big of a deal, not that bad of a, you know, like an every game thing that you could do. That being said, if you don't want to bring those in, there are other options, and there are options in specific matchups to do some other stuff. Specifically in aggro matchups that are trying to go really fast and really wide, you bring in Hypothermias. We have 3 Hypothermias in the deck. I do like Hypothermia. In fact, there's going to be some people that ask the question, and feel free to ask the question down in the comments below, but where are my copies of Channel the Bleak Expanse? I actually think I like Hypothermia over Channel the Bleak Expanse right now, but there are options, and there are things that I may swap out that we'll talk about for some Channel the Bleak Expanses. Nevertheless, I like Hypothermia for any matchup that wants to go super wide. So all aggros, Briars, Katsus, Phais, of course, things that you're going to go again. You just take that away by playing this from Arsenal. And again, it's a 0 cost, and that's a really big deal. In those matchups, if you choose to play the race game, you can Arsenal Hypothermia. You can play Hypothermia on your opponent when they try to gain go again to certain attacks or whatever. And then you stop it, and then you also set yourself up to Waning Moon them for 3 because this is a non-attack that you are playing. It is an Affliction Aura, but it is a non-attack action card, so it does turn on the Waning Moon. These are also possibly considered just straight up core cards. In most matchups, you could just play these out there and just be happy. You probably don't want to include them in things like Guardian, though, because they don't generally try to go super wide or play things that have you know, big pushes. But nevertheless, you could consider these core cards in most matchups, things like Lexi, things like you know, Phi, and even Dromai, like you could definitely do it for that. So you have 2 packages there. Now, on to this package, and this is the interesting package. We play these cards into the Guardians, into the Brutes, into the slower matchups that want to set up, and this is your way of setting up a very big combo turn. So we play 2 energy potions, and we want to establish at least one of these onto the board so that we can pay for, well, easily pay for the combo that we're setting up. We establish an energy potion. We play 2 of them, so you put 2 in the deck, and then you play Sigil of Permafrost. I've seen a couple people include the yellow and the blue in this slot, but I think the red's fine. It also blocks 4, so you can honestly include this into more matchups than just the slower ones if you wanted to include something that's a little bit more defensive. But we play a Sigil of Permafrost off of one of the resources that we gain from Energy Potion. The other resource is used for the Storm Striders, so that we have 2 resources for both of those effects. One for Sigil of Permafrost, and we fuse this from our hand. and then we pay the other resource from the energy potion for the boots so that we can then play a freezing point. Play a freezing point, pitching a blue from hand, at which point you, after fusing the Sigil of Permafrost, you fuse the freezing point as well, and then you push that big combo damage. You've established some Frost Hexes earlier in the game, you fused this, it says if it was fused the next time you deal Arcane, then create that many Frostbite tokens. So you push a freezing point that is fused, which sees you create, previous Frostbites and also sees you have established Frost Hexes on the board. It pumps itself from like 5 damage all the way up to like 8, 9 damage. And then when it hits, deals any amount of Arcane, this is going to create more Frostbites. Again, if your opponent can't pay into those and kind of wipe them from the board, all of those Frostbites are going to deal 1 damage per Frost Hex you've established. So I'll show you that combo here in a little bit, but that's basically what it is. I've talked through it a few times just so that you kind of get the idea in your head. This is our more defensive package. We run 2 Oasis Respites. I feel like this card's just so good. You can play this into like any deck at this point. This is just a good card into like any matchup, so you could also just consider running these just straight up. Oasis Respite, really, really good card. We have 2. I took 1 out so that I could get 3 Hypothermias. And then finally we have Sink Below. Sink Below, a fantastic card. Again, this is just a meta where like things like Sink Below and Fate Foreseen are perfect. It's the same thing for Oasis Respite. It's just one of those cards that blocks 4. This one doesn't gain you life, but it lets you cycle a card from your hand. You bring this in if you don't feel like racing a deck or if you feel like you can't outrace a deck, so you play a little bit more defensively, a little bit more disruptively. Things like Fi, maybe you just say I can't outrace Fi, so I want to play more defensively, more disruptively, and in doing so, hopefully I can slow the game down long enough to establish a couple of big power turns and steal the game. So this is when you would bring that in. And then finally, we have some fun gadget kind of sideboard tech. Rewind. I am big on this card. I'm big on this card because Briar with Channel Mount Heroic is good right now. And this basically just bounces their Channel Mount Heroic. And it says you can't really play that again because you've already pitched the blue in your hand. They tech their deck in such a way that they have like a blue every turn, and this just says, yeah, you tried playing it, but it's not great. You can also bounce Channel Lake Frigid, so if you're playing in the mirror, for example, and your opponent tries to flash down a Channel Lake Frigid on your turn from their arsenal, you can bounce it back to their hand. They don't have an arsenal anymore. They can't play at instant speed anymore. They may have gained an action point, but they can't have an action point on your opponent's turn. So they just lose out. So this is really good, and this is fantastic into Kano. This crushes, absolutely crushes their combo turn because you rewind. This is so sad for me because I love Kano. You rewind their Wildfire after they've already cracked their boots, and their game is over. They lose. So this card is like a silver bullet into those specific matchups. Anyone playing like an expensive non-attack, you can run this out. I have this in the sideboard, 2 copies. It may not be good enough, but right now in my mind, I really love it, so I'm running it. And then finally we have Scours. This is also one of those that may not be good enough right now, but I'm running it anyway. Scour comes in for Rune Blades that are building up Rune Chance, or any deck that wants to build up a lot of like tokens. So heck, even like Sift Bravo. Anyone heard of Sift Bravo? It builds a lot of Seismic Surges. Like anything that builds tokens, you can just pitch into and destroy them, which is super good. Same thing for Prism, because you can pay for the effect to destroy Spectral Shields. So that is pretty fantastic as well. We run 2 copies. This is another card that may not make the cut, but if we wanted to just cut these cards, that would give you 4 like tech slots to maybe put in your Channel to Bleak Expanses if you really like that card, or anything else that you want to put in there that pushes extra damage, perhaps some like extra reds, that sort of stuff. So this is the sideboard, and that's when you would side these cards into specific matchups, trying to make a 60 card, maybe a 62 card deck. You could even go up to 65 cards if you really wanted to, but I think the tighter that you make this, probably the better that it is overall, because then you're not flooding your deck with things that just don't do what you want them to do in specific matchups. Okay, so as I mentioned before, I want to show you how this big damage combo turn kind of works, because this is what you're doing into specific like slower matchups. This is kind of how you win the game, and this is what sort of started the deck for me. This is like the one thing that made me want to build this deck, and then I wanted to make it flexible for a variety of matchups. So this is how I got to this, building out this turn first and figuring out what we could kind of push as far as damage. Now, I'm going to just sort of do a median style turn that doesn't push 1 billion damage, but does push a lot of damage nonetheless. So we have established for our opponent 2 Frost Hexes over the course of the game. So they have 2 Frost Hexes. We've played down 1 Energy Potion. We've put an Ice card into our arsenal from a previous turn, and we've drawn these cards into hand. There's 2 blues that are both Ice, Sigil of Permafrost, and Freezing Point. So we wait for our opponent to, maybe extend some attacks, and on a specific attack, we can choose to destroy the Energy Potion and gain 2 resources. In doing so, I'll just throw one of these out there. In doing so, since you can read it, we have 2 resources, and we can now pay for Sigil of Permafrost to come down. And then we can fuse Sigil of Permafrost, showing an Ice card. At instant speed, we can also, just for fun, just flash down the Arctic Incarceration. That gives our opponent 2 Frostbites. I wish I had, like, a Frostbite, like, counter. That would be pretty cool. But we're just going to say that they have 2 Frostbites. In fact, they're about to get a lot more Frostbites. Probably better to use this D20. So in this process, after fusing this, we've blocked 4. We've given them 2 Frostbites with Arctic Incarceration. And at this point, we have 1 resource floating from playing the Sigil. Of course, we're going to use that last resource to activate Storm Striders. Okay, paying a resource. So we can now play a card from hand at instant speed. So we are going to play this Freezing Point, okay, fusing it and pitching. So pitch there, fuse here. And in doing so, this is not going to deal 5 damage. It's actually going to deal 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 damage. So this pushes 9 damage. Now, if we've done this on a turn where our opponent doesn't have a ton of resources, or if we wait towards the end of their turn when they've like pitched away and paid and played cards, then they could, let's just assume that they can't block any of this damage. Okay, that's an ambitious assumption, but let's just make that assumption. They take 9 damage. Sigil of Permafrost sees that you've dealt damage, and it bumps this up. So 9 plus 2 is 11. So they now have 11 Frostbites. If they can't deal with 11 Frostbites at the end of their turn, well, this is going to deal them 11. Technically, all 11 of these will deal 1 apiece, but that will trigger for that, and they'll do it again. So this is a 22 damage just off of Frostbites. It's 30 damage, 31 damage if we're counting the 9 that we dealt from Freezing Point. And don't forget, you could also, just to add, insult to injury, we could pitch away in Waning Moon because we have played a non-attack this turn. So you could push a lot of damage just off this. Now imagine if you've had the time to establish a 3rd Frost Hex. They're dead from a lot of different numbers. Okay, they're very dead, very, very dead from this setup. And again, all it takes is setting the Frost Hexes, setting an Energy Potion, and finding 1 Sigil, 1 Freezing Point, 2 Ice Blues. Okay, so it's not a terrible ask. It's not this big ask. This is definitely something that you can set a second cycle for. It's something that you can prep for over the course of the game, and you don't have to go off of 3 Frost Hexes. You can just go off of 2. Even if you went off of 1, like looking at just 1 Frost Hex, this is still dealing 11 damage plus 9 damage here plus 3 damage here. So you're looking at 23 damage, and you can do that fairly early. You are, in that moment, kind of resigning yourself to pushing all of this damage and never being able to do it again because you have popped the boots. But we can play more easily at instant speed because we can play from Arsenal. So this is really not asking a lot from our setup and not asking a lot from Iyslander. She can kind of just do this sort of stuff. So this is what you can play into for a variety of matchups, which means even in like certain mid-range or aggro matchups, you can consider bringing this package in. But this is a fantastic package for things like Guardian and Brute. Now they can pitch, of course, if they are playing smart and you combo off a little earlier in their turn, they can pitch to stop any number of these, and so maybe they only end up with, like, I don't know, 7 Frostbites. But if with 2 of these established, that's still 14 damage just from the Frostbites if they can't get rid of them. So that is the big sticking point. You want to find a time to do this combo when they can't pay for the Frostbites, the tax, to do anything else. So there you go, that is my Iyslander mid-range classic constructed list. And again, if you want a copy of this list, feel free to become a patron down in the comments section or in the description. Click the Patreon link. For $5 a month, you're getting a full write-up and deck list, a full guide to this. These videos are on Patreon as well for you to access whenever you want. It's all going to be archived by like tags so that you can easily access Classic Constructed versus any Blitz list. I'm going to put up Commoner lists. I'm going to even put up UPF lists. So if you want any of those lists, you're going to be able to have access to all of that sort of thing. If you enjoyed this video, if you got something out of it, feel free to make that number go to the number. Not just supporting via Patreon, but even just clicking this, clicking like, leaving a comment. Those are all super supportive. I spend tons of times on these videos. I hope you get something out of it. I hope you at least enjoy them. If you do, please let me know in a comment below. As always, thanks for watching.